everyone, Lou here. You know, I love Genshin Impact and Honkai Star Rail. Since I love both and they're both owned by Hoyoverse, why not do a video comparing the two of them? I haven't really seen a video comparing them properly, so let's do it! Genshin Impact was created by, at the time named miHoYo, on September 28, 2020 to quite the critical acclaim. I did a review for Genshin about a year after its launch if you guys want to see it, and since then my thoughts have largely remained the same, though I am a little more critical of some stuff, like it's pretty grind heavy and representation issues with characters from Natlan and Sumeru. I mean, it's not really my place to critique Sumeru representation, but as someone of Latin American descent, I think I do at least have some say in the choices of representation for Natlan. That's deviating though, but I am giving a quick critique just to show that I'm not slurping Hoyoverse's stuff, you know? Well, Honkai Star Rail was released fairly recently on April 26, 2023 to massive critical acclaim. I did a review for it as well that's down below, and again, my opinion has largely remained the same, and if anything, it's actually gone up higher than my initial review. People often compare Genshin Impact and Honkai Star Rail from being made by the same company, as well as having extremely similar systems aside from the gameplay. Genshin plays like an extremely simplistic version of something like maybe Kingdom Hearts or Breath of the Wild, while Honkai Star Rail plays surprisingly similarly to Final Fantasy XIII, but actually if it were fucking good. Banners, gacha system, and even schedule are eerily similar, so people often compare them and often say Honkai Star Rail is better because of the system for it. However, let's see if this really is better, though keep in mind I do genuinely love both, but hey, it's all in good fun for me. Quick disclaimer that I like to play the female character in both games, but you can choose the gender of the main character. I just like playing the female lead because when there's a hot guy, I will self-insert, damn it. Genshin Impact is about a girl named Lumine whose sibling was taken by an unknown god as they tried to leave the world of Teyvat, and awoke alone but found a travel guide fairy thingy named Paimon who joins on her journey to uncover the mysteries of Teyvat and why her sibling has sided with the corrupted evil of the world. Each land in Teyvat is inspired by different cultures around the world. An example being that Liyue is inspired from China, Inazuma is Japan, and Fontaine is France. It makes each story and each nation feel special as a result and easily recognizable if you know the culture well if you're a cultural nerd like me. However, just because there is mass creativity doesn't mean the story is always great. Some stories in the game aren't that great or kind of boring. Like, I think the Aranara quest in Sumeru is very cute and has a beautifully sweet ending, but let's be real, that was way too fucking long for the story it was trying to tell. Then you have fantastic stories like Fontaine's Archon quest, how there were these massive twists and turns that were clearly foreshadowed but easily missed. But it all came together in an epic and grand finale that had me in awe and gasping. I could literally go on and on about how much I love Fontaine's Archon quest and Furina's character development because Furina is one of my favorite characters. The biggest issue though, above all, is that the story can feel immature. First you have Paimon dumbing everything down to us, the player, as though we're fucking stupid or like this is My Hero Academia. Second is that the story only wants to be bold in books or other lore material, which means super casual players are not gonna find that unless they Google it, basically. A big example would be how the character Kaveh actually struggles with artist block due to grief of his mom dying, but you would never know that if you don't have Kaveh and play with him enough to unlock his character story. The same goes with books, where the death of Rex Lapis's companion is written more tragically as she dies and turns to dust in his arms, where an event cutscene shows she kinda just turned into a rock or whatever. It just doesn't feel as emotional for Rex Lapis, knowing he didn't get to comfort her as she lay dying. Third is that important character moments are often saved for temporary events. A huge example being that the character Diona meets the Oceanid who blessed or cursed her to make the best alcoholic drinks ever despite hating alcohol. That's kind of important to Diona, who's a naive kid who doesn't understand alcohol isn't always abused by everyone. But nope, it's a temporary event where we never see that development in the main story material or even other temporary events. The same goes for Wanderer or Scaramouche who joined the Academia for Nahida or something. I missed that event unfortunately, so the details are lost. So when you play the next temporary event, you're kind of confused on how and when he joined the Academia or when he met Nilou, because like I said, I missed that event. Finally, the story doesn't want to be bold with its main characters. Hoyoverse's previous game, Honkai Impact 3rd, and their current game, Honkai Star Rail, are both bold enough to kill off characters. Genshin will pretty much only kill off NPCs with very little development like Signora, or that one guy in Inazuma whose name I can't even remember. Even Dunyarzad, who honestly should have died, isn't killed off because she was clearly too developed at that point for the devs to feel right, despite the fact that it would have made Sumeru extremely impactful. Instead, Nahida randomly pulled her back to life and it feels cheap, like they're scared to kill off likable or memorable characters. I'm not saying everyone has to die or something, but at least be bold enough to kill off a playable character. Hell, look at Honkai Star Rail. Gallagher is canonically erased from existence, so he's technically dead. That same should apply to Genshin, and they both should be bold enough to kill off characters. A huge example would be to kill off Baizhu because he canonically has a short lifespan because of his deal with Changsheng, or Lisa who traded half her life for knowledge. All these would be extremely impactful, but they just don't do it. It makes the story not only feel more mature, but has a bit more of a hit to it. Lisa, as an example, we receive for free in-game, and many players use her for a while and always end up using her in demos for other characters, so it would feel very emotional and bold to kill her off, knowing how attached we as players have grown to her. I'm not saying Genshin isn't dark, because it is. Wriothesley's backstory, as an example, is quite literally just the promised Neverland if Ray brutally killed Isabella instead of escaping with Emma. Lynette was sold off and almost assaulted if it wasn't for Arlecchino, or even Scaramouche/Wanderer, who has thoughts of self-deletion, and actually did kind of technically succeed with that self-deletion, just not in the way he wanted. A fear to really sucker punch the writing makes some stories with bold themes and references not hit as hard. Like, I will admit that Inazuma's story really could have been better when half the theme was commentary on Japan's isolationist history during the Edo period. Instead, it kind of cheapens that rich cultural history with Fatui bad and A can't do anything wrong because she's a hikikomori queen and fail wife. And mind you, I'm saying this as A is one of both my favorite characters in Inazuma and one of my favorite Inazuma character designs. However, despite failing to be more mature and gut-punching in its writing, Genshin does genuinely offer very good stories. They're not all great. I really didn't like Eula's character quest when I don't really like her, but some are very good. A personal favorite recently was Furina's because, as I've said, Furina's the best character and I'll fight everyone on that. Now let's go to Honkai Star Rail. You play as Stell, a person of unknown origin who had a Stellaron put into her by Kafka. Stellarons are magical, cancerous, destructive stars that cause massive damage to planets and are made by the god, or Aeon, as they're called in the game, of destruction. The Stellaron is actually stable inside of Stell's body and is quickly found by Dan Heng and March 7th, who bring her to the rest of the crew of the Astral Express, Himeko and Welt Yang. Himeko asks if you want to join the Astral Express, so you do as you go around traveling the world to explore and helping people when necessary. The Astral Express worship the fallen Aeon of the Trailblaze named Akavili, who believed in exploring worlds and lending a helping hand, so that's what everyone does. All the while we learn more about the galaxy we're in, the world building, and the characters we've come to know like Dan Heng. One glaring issue, at least for me, is that I never played Honkai Impact 3rd, and I don't really have plans to because I'm not a personal fan of its gameplay, and story is just a bit too oversaturated for my liking. The reason I say this is because Honkai Impact 3rd is heavily referenced several times in this game, and some characters from that game quite literally dimension hopped into Honkai Star Rail. In this case, Welt from Honkai Impact 3rd traveled to the Honkai Star Rail world with some guy named Void Archives. I don't understand who that is, so There are also characters who are reincarnated or AU versions of Honkai Impact 3rd characters like Himeko, Branya, and Sushang, I think. So an example being that the story of Penacony heavily hyped up the character of Acheron because she's this world's version of Raiden Mei, but as someone who never played that game, I never understood why. Obviously, Genshin does do the same thing, as Genshin is another dimension canonical to Honkai Impact 3rd. A is Mei, Yai Miko is Yai Sakura, Farina is maybe Sela, and recently Mavuika is Himeko. However, Genshin doesn't feel like I had to know the story of a previous game. This one particularly feels that way if you want to understand Welt and Acheron. However, it's not a major issue as you go later into the story. I sure as hell didn't feel like I needed to know a previous game when I got to the Xianzhou Luofu, especially with Penacony. One massive praise I'm going to give is that unlike Genshin, the story can and will pack a punch in both character depth and character development. These developments are not temporary stories but main story content, and although optional, easily to access through side stories. My biggest example would be Tingyun, who although may or may not be dead if the leaks are correct, the point still stands that a woman we came to know and really like named Tingyun had her neck snapped on screen as the main villain of the story came on screen. Even Cocolia, who tried to put the Stellaron in her body only to explode and die, had a more shocking and impactful death than Signora, a character who was also based off Cocolia from Honkai Impact 3rd. Then there's just Misha's death that broke my heart as someone who adored his character and was actually playing him in-game frequently up until that point. Then there's just the entirety of Penacony, one of the most beautiful and heartfelt main stories in a game that its grand finale involving fighting Sunday had me actually emotional, which, although I love Hoyoverse games, Genshin never managed to make me do that. You gotta admit, there's just something so powerful about when Himeko says, "Witness the will of the weak." Honkai Star Rail also handles more mature themes more gracefully and easier, really taking advantage of its T rating instead of only being a T rating because of alcohol and violence like in Genshin. Penacony is again my biggest example of this when the story so beautifully handles balancing nihilism and optimism. Acheron, although an emanator of nihility, answered so beautifully to Adventurian on how, even when nothing matters, you hold on because if nothing matters, then why give up? It's hard to explain, but it really reminded me of the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once. Another massive praise to give is that if you're lost on something, there's an appendix available in the menu that's easily accessible so you can familiarize yourself with aeons, key moments in the past that everyone knows, terms used, factions, and more, which will also link to other pages associated with that thing. An example being that if you were reading about the Aeon Aha, it will lead you to pages about the Masked Fool and Morning Actors, both factions who worship Aha. There are still books to grab, but it's more like side fluff and world building that the main story answers in merely passing, but it's there if you want it and it's just measly bits being mentioned. An example being that maybe March 7th mentions how only the rich people get to go to Penacony, and later you find a magazine article on the 10 richest tycoons who live on Penacony, stuff like that. Though some can be linked to very, very side quests. Like, I believe if you want to complete all the Hanu minigames of Penacony, you'll have to find all the adventure books of Hanu or whatever. If you ask me, while I do love both stories in their own way and clearly has their own strengths and weaknesses, I'm gonna give it to Honkai Star Rail. Despite being so new, its story has managed to really pack a punch and doesn't shove details we want to see to the side or feel like playing chicken with bolder choices they clearly want to take. Honestly, if it wasn't for the alcohol and violence, Genshin should have had an E10 plus rating. I'm not saying that's a bad thing either. I just don't get my hopes up for playable character deaths or extremely dark storylines. Notlin should be releasing soon, or maybe it has released at the time I finish writing and editing this video, or now if this video is uploaded when I think it will be, and I'm not holding my breath for anything commenting on violence, war, and glory in a mature, extremely in-depth way. Now this doesn't feel right to compare. I mean, it's like saying fruits and vegetables are the same thing just because they come from the dirt. If that makes any sense anyway, I don't really know what kind of analogy to make here because I wrote this late and I'm kind of bad at analogies. Like, they play completely different in terms of main gameplay. I mean, the gacha system is exactly the same though. You have the new banner running with a rerun of some kind, but replace signature weapons with light cones, which are basically like a gif of an important life moment. But in this case, it's an important moment in someone's life. Like how Boot Hill's light cone is the day he became a cyborg, or Clara's is her and Svarog's most cherished memory of them having fun in the snow. Function-wise, they work the same as weapons. However, something that I recently learned is that Honkai Star Rail's banner system is a bit more fair than Genshin's, in terms of getting the character you want anyway. Apparently it's a glitch in the code where instead of an even 50-50, it's more like a 60-40 chance. Basically, when you lose a 50-50, you're given a random character from the standard banner pool. Instead of calculating just the standard banner pool, the game accidentally puts the banner character in the losing 50-50 pool. I hope they don't patch this out because it makes Honkai Star Rail feel a bit more fair and generous, and I can definitely attest this game's 60-40 pool works when I have only lost one 50-50 since I started playing. Every character and light cone I've rolled for, I've gotten, so that's just crazy to me. Anyway, the same goes for set items like in Genshin, although you only need 4 items instead of 5 like in Genshin, and instead you get an extra bonus via planetary items from the simulated universe. Though the level up and development system for both is completely different. In Genshin, if you want to level up a character's talents or ultimate, you would need talent material, of course, but instead of needing it based off of a character's status as a DPS or healer, it's based off where they're from. For instance, Sumeru characters need the talent up material from Steeple of Ignorance. More specifically, Alhaitham would need Ingenuity as an example. While in Honkai Star Rail, talent level ups are categorized as their path playstyle, though keep in mind, gameplay largely doesn't reflect the path the character actually follows. An example being that Dr. Ratio is a character of the Hunt, which means he's a single target DPS, but in lore, he's likely a follower of the Erudition. Although more recent updates have split for more materials for characters of the Hunt, for instance, before it was a single arrow material, and now it's either an arrow or bullet material for the Hunt characters, though so far the bullet material is only for Boot Hill. This does make the game very grind heavy if you're trying to level up both light cones and characters at the same time. The current path playstyles, by the way, are Hunt, Erudition, Preservation, Abundance, Nihility, and Harmony. Hunt characters are single DPS, Erudition is AoE DPS, Preservation is shield, Abundance is healer, Nihility is debuff and AoE, and Harmony is stat support like attack up or maybe an ultimate that gives some kind of bonus. This does make for an easier understanding of how a party works, but it does make for less creative gameplay. Some characters you might get away with breaking their mold. I know quite a few people turn Gallagher into a DPS despite being a pure healer, but largely there's no room for creative gameplay or focusing on a specific kind. An example being that in Genshin, combat is based more off of elemental reactions that give bonus damage, with each having their own positives and negatives. An example being that Overload, which is when you attack with Pyro and Electro, sends enemies flying. Meanwhile, another example is Bloom, which is when you combine Hydro and Dendro, creating tiny bombs of Dendro damage that can hurt you if you are too close when they go off. If you want, you can take it a step further by using Electro to aggravate and accelerate the Dendro damage, automatically setting it off as tiny Dendro bombs. So you could take a Dendro character and build them to focus specifically on that kind of damage. Hell, you can take healers in the game and turn them into damage. I know people say Barbara can't be a DPS, but she absolutely can if you build her with Ocean-Hued Clam and have Farino or Xingqiu on your team. I mean, I didn't build my Barbara that way, but I've seen it done, so it is possible. However, there is a reason Honkai Star Rail doesn't have that kind of flexibility, and it's because the game is a turn-based RPG, while Genshin plays something akin to Breath of the Wild in terms of being a real-time combat, but its elemental abilities make it very different. I mean, Link mid-fight with a Lionel can't send down a giant meteor, can he? Some say Genshin's combat is slower because enemies take longer to go down because they have way too much fucking health, and I can only really agree with that sentiment in the Spiral Abyss, which is considered a extremely challenging bi-monthly trial for players to show off their skills. In the overworld, the only thing that really takes a long time to defeat is world bosses, and that honestly depends on which one, or those stupid fucking Hydro characters in Fontaine because my dumbass just had to be partial to Hydro characters. Which loops back to a point I want to make that the game is extremely flexible in who you want to play, but remember that like any game you want to get good at, you have to really study up on what does what, and game guides are going to be your best friend. An example being that I have a child with no constellations, but thanks to guides and experimenting myself, my child pulls in crazy fucking numbers because I've learned by now who he works with best and how to work around his cons. I think the same goes for Honkai Star Rail though. You're not going to pull crazy numbers or take enemies down unless you know how to work the game's numbers. Like before, I just would get any random item for 4-piece bonuses without realizing my character would do better if the item bonuses themselves boosted whatever bonus they need to do more damage. An example being that Arataki Ito's damage with his ultimate, which pops off pretty often, is based off his defense rather than focusing on attack with Ito. You want to make sure the items within that set bonus have defense to increase the damage of his ultimate. Now when my Ito pops off his ultimate on top of Goro's, Ito has done some crazy fucking damage even as many players think Geo sucks. My biggest critique though with Honkai Star Rail does come here because the gameplay will demand you have a certain type to win something or that character be maxed out with this specific set. An example being the game mode Pure Fiction, where you literally cannot finish or complete this game mode unless you have a ton of characters with follow-up attacks. Which sucks because the game doesn't feel fair and feels more like I have to have a specific character in order to even pass this game mode. It's like if Genshin made a game mode where you can only win if you only have pyro characters, and that's not fun and makes the game's gacha mechanics feel pretty egregious. Like, yeah, the 50-50 system is pretty fair, but I shouldn't have to roll for a character whose playstyle I may not like Topaz, just to play a game mode that should solely depend on my skills as a player. That and the other game mode, Forgotten Hall, is also extremely difficult. Like, I swear Honkai Star Rail has moments where it's almost unnecessarily difficult. Another major example being bosses in the game's main story. Like, Aventurine and that stupid fucking deer thing are way too damn difficult to the point of being completely unfair. Hell, some of them make you feel like you need a specific character to just win. Like with Aventurine, where you need Misha or Herda just to win. Overall, although I do like Honkai Star Rail's gameplay, I'm gonna give it to Genshin because Genshin doesn't make me feel frustrated in more challenging areas that I need a specific character to win. I also like the exploration aspect because I love seeing all the intricate detail that Hoyoverse puts into the world of Teyvat. Like any gacha game, character designs is the name of the game here. If you make a shitty character design, no one's gonna want to roll for that and spend money. That said, both games equally have fantastic character designs, albeit a bit different due to the game's genres and storytelling. Honkai Star Rail is a sci-fi with references to periods of time of certain planets. An example being that Penacony is largely influenced by the glitz and glamour of America in the 1920s, so just about everyone there looks like they hopped straight out of The Great Gatsby. Well, Genshin is a fantasy story with heavy influence from The Legend of Zelda in particular, so a lot of characters are fantasy versions of certain cultures. Honkai Star Rail does take from certain cultures too, but not as much as Genshin, since I don't think space stations have a massive, expansive culture going on for hundreds of years, do they? Genshin, meanwhile, takes from cultures around the world with some varying degrees of respect. The main issue these days involves the nations of Sumeru and Natlan. Sumeru is based off Persia, Iraq, Egypt, Turkey, and India. A large majority of these countries feature people of color, and yet Genshin's equivalent hardly do, with the exception of the Sumeru Desert that is quite literally just Egypt, where all the characters are people of color, so thank goodness for that, but their treatment in the game leaves a lot to be desired. An example being that the Archon of Sumeru, Nahida, is based off of several goddesses in Hindu mythology, and her outfit alone is culturally referring to India's depictions of goddesses. And yet she's, very pale in what's supposed to be a Hindu goddess. I can't really show any pictures of Hindu goddesses, by the way, because a large majority of pictures I found online had their boobies out. Another example more recently is Natlan, where the characters are based off the region of Hawaii, Aztec period, Latin America, Mexico, Nigeria, Spain, and Maori culture, all of which again are largely people of color. Bringing in the Archon example again, the Pyro Archon Mavuika is named after a fire deity of Maori culture. It's weird having a character of Maori origin look very pale, even if she is supposed to be this world's version of Himeko from other Honkai games. Again, it's not my place to talk about Sumeru because I'm not of any descent of any of those countries, so I feel like it's not my place to sit here and defend a people who may or may not be offended by it. I'm not that kind of person anymore to sit here and be the voice for people who I don't know how they feel about. I will say, again, I am of Latin American descent, and so for me, I personally think it's fucking weird to have very pale characters with traditional Aztec names. However, this is just me, and there could be those of other regions Natlan is inspired by who don't care because we've got bigger things going on in the world right now than to gripe over a video game. I'll play devil's advocate too that Genshin does do a beautiful job of researching culture to the tiniest details when it comes to every nation, even if the skin tone thing is still real weird. Like, the music in Sumeru is a gorgeous and respectful recreation of traditional Indian, Arabic, and other styles of music. Nilou in particular is one of my favorite designs from Sumeru, even without her new in-game costume. I drew Nilou XL Haytham fan art once, and from researching her outfit to learn how to draw it, the game puts so much detail into every piece of her dancer costume, although to some she is dressed as a belly dancer, which is an offensive outfit to put in a region like this due to very messy cultural reasons. To me, she is dressed as a typical dancer of a much older time period. From her shoes, her skirt thing, even her shawl on her head, Nilou's details are so beautiful and fantastic. Like, ugh, she's gorgeous. I love her so damn much. Even the detail of her ultimate having those little bell things in traditional dances is just brilliant, and her poses actually do mimic those traditional dances, which I completely forgot the name of because I didn't have too much time to do cultural research for this video, so I only had enough time to do the bare surface minimum, if that makes sense. Don't get me started on places like Fontaine and Inazuma either. Inazuma to this day is a gorgeous nation and did such a brilliant job incorporating the motifs of torii gates, sakura trees, and samurai castles so seamlessly with motifs of purple and lightning. Gosh, just every time I go to Tenshukaku to fight Signora, I am blown away with how gorgeous the details of the castle is. Honkai Star Rail does do this kind of research too, don't get me wrong, but it is more modern because it's a sci-fi, and so you do get slightly less historic clothing and architecture. An example being that Eurilo 6 is largely based off of Russia in the early 20th century, and so you get things like sci-fi cars that look like clearly based off ones from the early 20th century, and names like Boris, but you don't get more traditional side things like kokoshniks, highly detailed lace, or stuff like that. Though bonus points for Hook wearing an ushanka, because I think those hats are really cute on tiny characters, and is just an adorable combination to me. The place with the most culture in Honkai Star Rail is the Xianzhou Luofu, which is based to the brim with traditional Chinese culture and outfits from all kinds of dynasties across thousands of years of Chinese culture. I can't tell you exactly which ones, because I'm going to be honest, I am not good at my Chinese history, but you can tell who their favorite child is in terms of designs, if you know what I mean. However, we're still very early in Honkai Star Rail's story, so there hasn't been that many cultural issues compared to Genshin. The main ones being Aventurine is supposed to be Romani, based off of his people from the planet of Sigonia 4, and how they were treated according to his backstory, both in the Penacony story and if you have him in-game. The other issue is with Boot Hill, whose origin planet is quite literally translated to Algonquin Apache, with many pointing out Mexican culture thrown in due to the history of the cowboy, and Boot Hill's design motifs of the serape coming from Mexican cowboys than traditional American ones. ones. His backstory is also a direct parallel to the way Native Americans have been treated in America for hundreds of years. This would mean Boot Hill is likely a Native American or Mexican or mixed race, but is, well... Again, I'll play devil's advocate to say that Boot Hill is technically a Walking Dead man, so it's possible he's pale because he's dead, or he's albino since his eyes in his only artwork of when he's human is completely obscured, so we don't know if his white hair emerged before or after dying and becoming a cyborg. I just need to mention all this because it is important in judging character design, and it's important to point out when a culture is not appropriately being respected, as well as showing this just in case any of those cultures feel it's unjust to not show appropriate skin color, but keep everything else. Again, it's not my place to say any of this, beyond Natlan anyway, but it is super important to bring up, and for those who feel these characters need to have better respect to them, please submit your thoughts in Hoyoverse's surveys for Genshin and Honkai Star Rail. Just remember to keep it clean, because obviously no one is going to take criticism seriously if you sit there and call someone a bitch while being completely immature about it. In terms of character design, I am going to give it to Genshin. The main reason is that I don't like every single design for Honkai Star Rail, like especially early game designs like Asta, Ciele, and Serval. Then you have some characters who are honestly really boring, like Dan Heng's 4-star, Gepard, and Arlen. Not saying all character designs are like that. I fucking love Boot Hill, Fushuan, Herta, and Dan Heng's 5-star versions. Just that some characters don't wow me as much as other Genshin characters have. Overall, I gotta hand it to Genshin for having fantastic character designs, even if there are problematic elements involving specific cultures. I love both games equally, to be honest. Sometimes I do lean more towards Honkai just because Penacony's story got me really hard, but then other times I'll do one of my million side stories I haven't caught up with in Genshin just to be pulled right back into the world of Teyvat. I just keep swinging back and forth, so I can't really be the one to decide which one is better. Both games just have their own charm and fun, so it's hard for me to decide on either, really. That's why I'm super curious on which one you guys think is better. Are you a Genshin fan or a Honkai Star Rail fan after all the points I've made? I'm curious on who everyone's favorite character is, too. For Honkai Star Rail, my favorites are Sparkle and Boot Hill, and for Genshin, it's Furina and Arataki Ito. As always, let me know down below. Hey guys, thanks for watching! If you liked the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing if you're new. If any of you would like to help support my channel in any possible way, my Ko-fi page is down below in the description, along with all of my social media. For any subscribers, new or old, who'd like to help with video ideas, or maybe just want to talk about anime or something, I have a fan server linked down below. See you next time!